Remember too, Mike, you like to move around, Mike, so I'm gonna go over here, then go over here. You got me?
I got you, man. I got you.
All right, check it.
I have a question. So, I haven't read the book, I'll admit that. Is it fair to characterize your experience at the University of Arizona as ostracism? Is that fair? That's not the question. But
I was ostracized by some individuals of the university community, yes, but it wasn't an all-encompassing phenomenon.
Okay. So my question then is, you're an academic, right?
Yes.
So why didn't you pursue the peak oil and the coming extinctions and the crises that are, why didn't you pursue that academically? Because the scientists who discovered and documented climate change weren't necessarily ostracized from their institutions.
I did pursue this academically. I had a book on climate change come out in 2003.
So what was the difference between you and the other scientists, I guess is what I'm asking.
I was writing about the termination of this set of living arrangements. I was pointing out the absurdities of infinite growth on a finite planet. Universities are just microcosms of American culture. They depend upon growth, specifically economic growth, for their own survival. If we don't have sustained economic growth, universities, like all of the large systems, fail. And there were personality issues. I've been called really bad names, and probably that's mostly accurate. I mean, so maybe I am crazy. How would you know? Is our society a metric for sanity? Derek Jensen says this culture and most of its members are insane because we think we can pursue infinite growth on a finite planet with no adverse consequences. And most people actually believe that.
Hi, Margie Brooks. I'm one of Guy's former students. I work for the National Park Service here in Tucson. And the film is fabulous. It's powerful. I'm dismayed at the age of the audience. They're all like my age, not everybody, but I have a 16-year-old daughter. We had dinner with her. She didn't want to come. How can we engage the younger community? I see Jake and Michelle. You have a 16-year-old daughter. She's not here either. And it seems like it's so important to get this message to a younger audience. Any ideas, Guy?
Well, I would argue that first of all, we're all born into captivity, and almost nobody sees the bars. And so by the time you're 16, you're fully enculturated into this set of living arrangements, and you've been watching TV your whole life, and thinking that that's reality. And I mean, how do you break that? I don't know. I don't have children. When I go on speaking tours, I meet with groups of children as young as 5 years old. And I tell the truth as I know it. And we talk about extinction as a natural process, and that it's coming to us. And in my experience, 5-year-olds handle a lot better than people my age.
I used to be a suit, but I don't wear a suit anymore. Let me stipulate a couple of things and then ask you a question. When I was about 10 years old, there were about 2 billion people walking around on this earth. Now we just learned last October there's about 7 billion, and we're fast on our way to maybe 9 billion people. When I was in the Peace Corps, we lived in a mud hut. For 2 years, I knew what it was like to prepare my own water every day so that I could have something to drink tomorrow. My question is, with all the respect that I have for the people like yourself that have a really powerful commitment to lifestyle change, how do you envision realistically a future in which millions, billions of people can modify their need for creature comforts and basics such that a new world of harmony with nature would prevail?
That's a great question, and I have incomplete and sad answer. The information I've seen indicates that the human carrying capacity of the globe, now that the planet has been so severely stripped of life, is considerably less than 500 million people. So I think we're headed there. That means in the relatively near future, a whole bunch of people will die. But on the other hand, I've known for a long time that birth is lethal, that nobody gets out alive. Will we willingly get to fewer than 500 million people, fewer than 500 million people? It's difficult for me to imagine that because there's no leadership. We won't even have the conversation. For me to have this conversation with you is anathema to everything we do in our daily lives. I haven't heard anything about population since 1968, with the population bomb. Since then, we've doubled the human population on the planet, and the conversation just went away. So I strongly suspect we won't reduce the human population with any sort of grace, because that would infringe upon people's rights, for example. During the single human generation in which China pursued a one-child policy, their human population nearly doubled. So that worked great. So force doesn't work. Asking people to be nice and not have children doesn't work. What works? I suspect one thing. And William Catton wrote about it in 1980 in Overshoot. I think we're approximately as smart as yeast. I'm a really fun guy at parties, though. No, I promise. No, really. I don't have depression, but I'm a carrier.
Guy, we've certainly exceeded our carrying capacity, but you could also argue that the best thing for the environment is not for us all to become pastoralists. There's not enough space, there's not enough natural resources, and by moving out into the land, we're actually reducing the natural biodiversity of those areas, making them less stable. So you could counter as an action to say the best thing is for us all to live in cities, try to go off the grid, put solar on our house, build cisterns, reduce our consumption, become vegetarians. So is that an alternative action that you support as opposed to saying get out of there and go live off the land?
I support anything different. What we're doing, what we have been doing for a long time is not working. So let's do something different. In fact, let's do everything different. I think cities, by definition, are civilization. Therefore, they are the problem. Cities, by definition, require extraction of resources beyond the land base, which is occupied by humans. They require us to extract water and clean air and return pollution and garbage to other places. So I think cities, civitas, the root of civilization, I think that's a bad idea. But on the other hand, I'm an avid supporter of Occupy and Idle No More and Blazing Cat Productions, the voice and images of Occupy, and all those organizations and movements that are doing something different than pursuing business as usual. Just going along like the little drones we've trained to become since birth, and doing what everybody else is doing. That's what we're all doing. That's what almost everybody is doing. So let's try something different. I don't know what it is. I think it's everything. I think it's all of the above.
Yeah, so are you growing anything? You don't need to irrigate. They take when it rains and...
Interestingly, many years ago, New Mexico recognized two things that the state of Arizona has yet to recognize. One, there's an actual connection between groundwater and surface water. Radical, I know. And two, that there's a finite amount of water. And so New Mexico, unlike Arizona, distributes their water at a fixed amount. So we have access to 1 acre-foot of water. It has, the average annual precipitation where I live is 16 inches. It has rained right at 16 inches since September 24th, 2010. So it's been a little dry. So we suck water out of the ground. We have a subsurface water right, which gives us the right to steal water from the future and from other organisms. And so essentially everything we grow requires additional water amendment in that extremely harsh environment. I'm not sure if that gets at your question.
Yeah, it does. I was just kind of thinking about trying to grow like a crop in the future that didn't require me to irrigate it, and just wondering if you'd found one.
Right, so the best, I would argue that the best thing that can be grown locally is tepiary beans, which are grown for many generations and require very, very little water input beyond the emergence stage. And then there are several varieties of corn that have been developed by indigenous peoples that can be planted coincident with the monsoon and will be ripe before it gets cold in the wintertime. So Hopi blue corn is something that we have experience with because it grows in a really dry area, and tepiary beans. I'm sure there's others, and I encourage you to go to Native Seed Search on North Campbell Avenue. They got it going on with respect to local plants.
The chairperson prevented you from teaching at the U of A. Is there no process to reinstate your teaching?
Department head's prerogative at the University of Arizona and most institutions of higher education is to assign teaching responsibilities. That's what they do. They have very little power, actually, but they can do one or two things, and that's one. And so knowing that I couldn't survive without teaching, and hired in part to make my life miserable enough that I would leave, her first administrative act was to invoke that departmental privilege. No, you can't appeal that. It's department has prerogative. You saw Aldous Huxley talk about dictatorships. That's the one thing really the department has any control over. So it's non-negotiable. I was still able to teach in the honors college, so I was teaching honors students and inmates my final years here in various incarceration facilities. So I made a disparaging comment about 350.org during the film. I feel more strongly about that today than I did then. Surely Bill McGibbon and James Hansen, who claim to be climate scientists, know the published literature about climate science. They surely know about the February 2009 paper by now from Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the U.S. that points out that CO2 levels in the atmosphere will never drop below their current level for at least the next 1,000 years. They also know that 350 is a death sentence. They have to. They also know, if they've been reading literature, that only economic collapse prevents runaway greenhouse. We've known that for 3 years. And yet, they're continuing to pound the drum, flying all over the country and asking us to not fly anymore. Bill McGibbon insists that we power down gracefully and stop burning so much fossil fuel. That's not going to work. It hasn't worked. We're in the midst of a great recession at least, and carbon emissions keep rising. Though 350.org is a mirage and a bad dream, and promoting the civilization and saving civilization while reducing to 350.org is disingenuous or ignorant or both. I don't have any issues really with 350.org except those.
I'm really fascinated that you had the insight to live with another family when you moved to somewhere in New Mexico. And full disclosure, I live in a co-housing community and have for almost 6 years. And I find that making deep connections with other people is not only just good for the soul, but it's also another way of, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about that as solutions.
Creating and maintaining a decent human community is one of the four things, one of the four attributes of not merely surviving, but thriving as human beings that we have needed for the entire 2+ million years of the human experience. We need clean water. We need healthy food. We need to maintain our body temperatures at some reasonable level, like 98.6 degrees comes to mind. And we need to create and maintain a decent human community. That's it. That's all. Human beings have thrived pursuing those 4 little things for a couple million years. And yet this entire set of living arrangements known as industrial civilization pushes us in the opposite direction for all those. Tells us that water comes out of the tap. And we're so convinced that we will defend to the death the system that allows water to come out of the taps, the system that's killing us. If we finally recognize that the water derives from a land base, maybe we will support to the death the system, the ecosystem that creates our water. Human community is absolutely imperative. So my wife and I do share 2.6 acres with another couple and the 10-year-old in charge. And sometimes I want to kill them all. You know, don't get me wrong. It's hard living with people. I love humanity. It's the people I fucking hate. And the community extends beyond that. So there are the 13 people at the land trust that I have potluck dinner with twice a month. The day I drove to Phoenix Thursday morning, I went up to a primitivist's camp, Wind, and he's an amazing guy. He's a hunter-gatherer. He's living as an indigenous human being. He makes all of his implements. He made me a cup of tea from 4 native plants, and he poured it into a cup that he had carved out of wood. And we sat there on structures that he had made with his hands, under a ramada that he'd made from native materials with his hands. And I love that. He's an amazing human being, and he knows that he's not alone. He knows that he can't do this alone. So he spends time cultivating community. He could survive barely, uncomfortably, in extreme existential poverty by himself. But he knows better than that. He's been living this way for 34 years. He's good.
My name is Charles. I organize with Deep Green Resistance. I have a question. I have a lead up to that question. So you say that we should terminate the industrial economy. I totally agree with you. You said, I think, to that classroom that we should each be going out every day and trying to make that happen. The industrial economy is a power structure. So to take down a power structure, we have to organize as a community. Going off, these questions, what you just talked about. We have to organize as a community and confront that power structure as a community. Basically, we have to have a culture of resistance to stop that industrial economy. And what we have right now is just an alternative culture, an alternative to this lifestyle, with resistance barely eking into that space. And what we see is a lot of very liberal, very individual ideas of changing the way we live. Just like we saw examples in this movie of changing the way we live, changing what we do, which is a very small fraction of the damage being incurred to the planet, because the main damage is coming from industry. So my question is a twofold question. One, how can we effectively go out about our days trying to terminate the industrial economy? And two, how can these wonderful individual / community efforts to change the way we live, but not resist directly resist the industrial economy, how can those communities support people who are trying to do that, or a movement, or how can they become more than they just are withdrawing? How can they become more than that?
So to answer the first question, I'm a huge fan of Deep Green Resistance. That's a movement as well as a book by Eric McVeigh, Lear Keith, and Derek Jensen. And so I would encourage you to look into that movement and pursue it. How do we terminate the industrial economy? There's a book, In the Game, written by Derek Jensen in 2006, 900 pages. The final 400 pages, the second volume, describe in great detail how we can terminate industrial civilization. Keith Varnish followed up with his book Underminers, which came out in the middle of last year and is available for free online at underminers.org. How to undermine the industrial economy, how to undermine industrial civilization. And it's free online. So there are lots and lots of specific steps individuals can take as acts of resistance. Walking away from empire is one. There's an old expression called walking away from the king. If enough people walk away from the king loses all power. And it's the same thing with respect to industrial civilization. If we all walk away from industry, if we stop feeding the beast, if we stop spending our money to support industry, if we stop acting as if this is the only way to live, then we suck the life out of the system. If enough people walk away from the king loses his power. Is that sufficient? No. I'm a huge fan of resistance against the dominant paradigm that is making us sick, making us crazy, and ultimately killing us.
Just walking.
Oh. Apparently that was the wrong thing to say. Apparently I've lost my voice. So walking away is a first step. It is an insufficient step. Okay?
Over here, the mentioned walking away from the king, and to me, the idea of control everything, doing what we've done, is the greatest step, but also for a lot of privilege and not go further. I'm wondering if you talk about these things with prisoners in your work, and what their types of questions were when you talked about the idea of it.
So doing what I did at the level I did requires an enormous amount of fiat currency and privilege, yes. So I picked the low-hanging fruit of empire for 20 years before walking away and saved a lot of fiat currency during that time. However, I know 13 people sharing a land trust of 19 acres, and none of them have 2 dimes to rub together. They're doing something very similar to what I'm doing without access to any fiat currency for all practical purposes. People who live in my community cover the entire socioeconomic spectrum. There are several millionaires in my community who could live anywhere they wanted in the world. They have enough money to do that. There's a couple of literary agents. There are other houses on Madison Avenue. And their main home now is a neighbor of mine. They could live anywhere in the world they wanted to, but they choose this place. And the same thing for the people who live on the land trust, who have no money at all. They could live like that anywhere they wanted to. The primitivists looked for 34 years for a place to land and landed there because it's an astonishingly accepting group of human beings. So to do what I did at the level I did requires an enormous amount of privilege. I recognize that. It also requires a step that most people view as ridiculous, which is to walk away from that privilege. I was 49 years old. I was at the height of my so-called career. I could have kept doing that for a long time. Remember, I was paid to not show up. So I could have kept doing that for a long time and been pretty happy. How do incarcerated people deal with the messages I give? It's great. One of the great things about dealing with incarcerated people is they speak truth to power. That's why they're there. Because they're willing to speak truth to power. So that's one of the primary reasons they're there in that facility. I love working with them. They'll say anything. They'll say what they actually believe. The second week we were teaching in the men's pods of the Pima County Jail, the second week, a 60-year-old man broke down and wept openly. You know the cultural pressure against men crying out here. Imagine what it's like in there. It's huge. And from that week forward, men broke down and cried every week. I can make women cry too. It's not just men. And so the emotions were exposed, the nerves were absolutely raw, and we were having conversations that you can't have out here because people won't have that conversation out here. because we're living in the hologram and we love it. So we won't talk about privilege. We won't talk about what it takes for two people to eat at any restaurant, in any of 150 restaurants in this town, for 2 hours work at minimum wage. What does that take? What underlies that? What's going on under the 20 bucks, 15 bucks of fiat currency? What's going on under there is enormous obedience at home, oppression abroad, and whole-scale destruction of the living planet on which we depend for our survival. Well, we don't talk about that. We just eat out. So yeah, privilege is a big deal. I've been on the right side of it my whole life. But I can't help that. Feel as guilty as I want. Doesn't matter.
I went to your presentation in college last fall, and you scared the hell out of the audience by saying that Southwest would become uninhabitable within about 4 or 5 years, and that we'd all be dead.
Do you find that scary?
No, I was going to ask the same question. Just one question.
I was wondering if you would reevaluate that conclusion.
In 2008, so 5 years ago, Oliver Tickle, writing for The Guardian, London's big newspaper, synthesized a bunch of scientific information and concluded that at 4 degrees centigrade above baseline, all we can plan for is extinction. All we can plan for is human extinction. A very reasonable, well-reasoned analysis of BP Energy Outlook 2030, which came out in January of this year. The assessment was done by the Vancouver Sun and is on their website dated January 30th this year. And that analysis concludes that we'll hit that 4 degrees C mark in 2030, 17 years from now. And at 4 degrees C, there's no human beings on the planet. The northern hemisphere will lose habitat for humans much more rapidly than the southern hemisphere, because the southern hemisphere has so much more water and so much less land to buffer that rise in temperature. Land masses heat up more than twice as fast than average. And if you're looking for the worst place to be, the absolute worst place to be in terms of human habitat, you would look to the southwestern interior of a large continent in the northern hemisphere, where I suspect we'll run out of habitat for humans in the not very distant future. It can happen any year. You know, we can have consecutive days, 2 or 3 days of 130 degrees, proteins denature, and we lose all the plants, and then the wind blows, and we're in the dust bowl that never ends. Live, Nietzsche said, as though the day were here. So, no, I haven't. In fact, all the evidence I've seen since I gave that presentation 6 or 8 months ago indicates that habitat for humans is going to be lost sooner than I thought then. I had this conversation with a guy yesterday, the father of a former student, and I would throw out little tidbits like this from the literature, and he would look at his 35-year-old son, and his eyes would get real big, and he'd look at his son like his son has the answers because he knows me, and his son just shakes his head and says, "Nope, Dr. Doom. There are no answers here. It's dire. It's horrific." And we keep going. We keep doing the same thing. And it's been a failure for a really, really long time. Get back there.
Guy, do you still believe that terminating the industrial economy is going to prevent environmental collapse?
Can you restate the question?
Do you still believe that terminating the industrial economy is going to prevent environmental collapse?
I don't think, no. No, I think it's too late to stop environmental collapse. I think we're so far into environmental collapse that merely terminating the industrial economy will not stop environmental collapse. I think we're probably headed for near-term human extinction, whether we stop the homicide or not. That said, resistance is fertile, it's a moral imperative, and I'm not really all that interested in just saving our species. There's a lot of other species out there too. We're driving 200 of them to extinction every day. So I think we should stop that. And I think the only way to do that is to terminate the set of living arrangements. So even though I think it's too late to save our sorry species, I think it's not too late to save 200 species a day, each and every day. I think it's not too late to stop the madness in time to give the living planet a chance. There's been a scientific assessment of one of the dozen self-reinforcing feedback loops we've triggered. One assessment of one of those, that's Arctic release of methane from the Arctic Ocean. And that assessment, published on February 9th of 2012 by Malcolm Light, a retired Earth system scientist living in Germany and teaching English as a second language with his wife, concludes that we're headed for loss of habitat for all species on Earth by mid-century. That's one feedback loop. We've triggered 12. I don't want to go there. I don't want to drive every species on the planet to extinction. That's clearly our plan. That's the goal. That's what we're trying to do by maintaining the set of living arrangements. I think it's horrific. So let's not do that. Yes. Wait. We must wait for the microphone.
I was wondering what encouraged you to start teaching.
She asked what encouraged you to start teaching, because obviously you suck at it. And you're making me not very happy at all. I don't know, I think I was born a teacher. When I was 6, I was in first grade, and I came home from school with the books, you know, the Spot and Dick and Jane books, and Spot and Puff. And I came home and I'm teaching my sister, who's a year and a half younger than me, and I point to these pictures and I say, "What's that?" And she said, "It's a dog." I said, No, that's Spot. And I was pissed, because she didn't know. I said, "What's that?" She says, "Cat." I said, No. I'm so frustrated. I'm 6 years old and she doesn't get it at 4 and a half. That's not a cat, that's Puff. You should know better than that. So something in me just makes me want to tell people that that's Puff. And that's Spot. It's not just any old dog. You know, it's a meaningful dog. So I don't know what is in us that makes us become what we are. But there's something in you, and it's there already. And if it's cultivated and encouraged, it will come out so that you can be just as wacky as me and your dad. That's something to look forward to.